3 stages, a little lunar module, which is a delicate machine, hidden in under slaw panels, protected from aerodynamics because it's not meant to fly in air, and the capsule right up on the tippy top. We climbed aboard that converted milk wagon NASA had painted up nicely, rode benches out, and had an intercom we could hook up, talk to suit techs. The day you get to the launch pad for the launch, it's different. Most times you go, and I've been out there testing the spacecraft before flying it, and it's normally a whole host of people up and down that stack working. The day you go out, there's no one there. You just have the 4 people waiting at the top and the 2 suit techs with you. And they succeed in getting you all strapped in and buttoned in, and they close the hatch, do a leak check, and they leave. This is the liftoff. The 5 F1 engines, they each produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust. But it doesn't move off real swift. It's not exactly slow motion, but it's slow. But it's building G's as it's going up because it's burning tons of liquid oxygen, RP1, kerosene actually, with propellant on this first stage. So it's getting lighter with the same amount of push. So the most unusual thing for me, I'd flown, been 2 Marine fighter squadrons on my way up and done a lot of different exotic maneuvering in airplanes. The most unusual thing of the ride was it's herky-jerky, I'd call it. It's not a good English word, I guess, but when the engine's gimbaled and the 4 outer engines moved to steer the rocket, that was exaggerated because you're way up on that top. And so it'd be like being on the top of a broomstick and somebody shakes the bottom, then it really, you felt it, an unusual motion compared to an airplane. We went around in Earth orbit about 2 times, at very low altitude, about 110 miles. And this shows us now having left the Earth. The 3rd stage was reignited by people on the ground, the S4B, and that got us to 25,000 miles an hour to leave the Earth, to leave Earth orbit, which is roughly 18,000 miles an hour. And we're headed out to the moon. Now, Jack Schweigert, who replaced Ken Mattingly 2.5 days before launch, is flying the machine, and he's trying to put a probe in that dark black circle you see in the upper right of the screen. That's the upper hatch of the landing craft. And when he inserts the probe in that hole, his latches can be fired to pull the 2 vehicles tightly together to get an airtight seal. And then you can open hatches on either side and have a tunnel to go between the two spacecraft, and you'll see a picture of that later. He's sighting on that thing just about disappearing there in the center, because when you get real close, you lose what you're trying to dock with in your window. So you have to use that offset target. Same thing they did with Shuttle on Space Station through all of its flights. Now this is after we had the explosion, and it's pretty dark because we never had lights on again. We had to save power, so we used flashlights if we had to read or write, and the only time we could shoot pictures, which I'm shooting here, is when it had sunlight coming in a window to allow you to give enough light to shoot pictures. And I'm taking a trip down through that tunnel now from the command module, the mothership, down into the limb. Here I'm popping out the bottom, playing around with I think a camera cover here. And zero G was the other very unusual thing about spaceflight. Of course, you could have short periods of that in an airplane, like 20, 30 seconds. But you can't have it continuous like you can in space. So floating yourself or objects, kind of euphoric. It did make our little vehicle seem a little bigger too, because you could use the whole volume. These are the people now in mission control that maybe you saw earlier pictures where they look pretty relaxed watching a TV show. Here you see a lot of furrowed eyebrows. The pressure was on. They ran simulators 24 hours a day, both at Kennedy and Johnson, where people were trying some of the new procedures out on the ground, proofing them. Jim Lovell over there, you see his commander's rubbing his hands. It had gotten very cold because we powered the limb down to about 12.5 amps on a 30-volt DC system. So that's about equivalent power on your sofa at home if you have lamps on either end of the sofa and you put them to the 3rd click on the light bulb. That's how much power we were using. And the spacecraft was not meant to operate at that low of power. So it got very cold and damp. Actually, the water separator didn't operate well, so water was collecting everywhere. Now this is a scene showing Deke Slayton in mission control holding the canister that they rigged on the ground, and they, as I said, they tested it in a vacuum chamber in Building 7 at Johnson to confirm that it worked okay before they passed that procedure up. Actually, Jack and Jim did it. The movie had me ripping cellophane. I was off duty. I was asleep when Jim and Jack built that thing, so I wasn't involved even. But it worked. Worked great. Now this is the moon as we went by it. The back side of the moon is quite different from the front side. It's much more rugged, not as many dark areas on the back side. And again, this is poor film, not just from the vintage it is. Oh, here's one of the first space selfies. I had the cameras running and I just set it out there and let it keep running in midair, shoot my picture. That's Jack Swigert asleep in the back of the landing craft. Now Jack was a command module pilot, and he spent all his time working on that vehicle and testing at the plant and at Kennedy and all his simulator training. He was never, the first time he was ever in a lunar module was in flight, when he joined us down in the limb. He had never been in one before in his life. We did a burn past the moon that cut off 10 hours. It helped us out with consumables. Yeah, I point this out to the school children to see if the ruler and the graph paper, they're plotting data manually. Computers power wasn't that great then. A big computer on board the spacecraft was 1/10 of a megabyte memory, 1/10 of a megabyte. Chow time, we gave up on freeze dry. I did anyway, and I think Jack's there spooning out like a thick beef stew, probably about 45 degrees temperature. Oh. And Jim had some frankfurters. I lived pretty much out of a separate door in the pantry area, and it had snacks. So I lived mostly off peanuts, bread cubes, and cookie cubes, about that big bite size. So that was my diet for most of that 4 days. This shows us coming back through entry. Another miracle, we had obviously abused the systems in the mothership. We shut it down, froze it literally. The water tanks froze. They were still found frozen when they recovered it on board the aircraft carrier. So we had violated specifications on almost all the avionics equipment, and yet it came to life and gave us the second most accurate splashdown of the program. Only Apollo 10 did better. We were recovered by the Iwo Jima aircraft carrier. It was actually had been on combat duty in Vietnam, and they rerouted it south to pick us up. They were on their way back to San Diego, so they came by and retrieved us. In the South Pacific, we were not too far south of the Samoan Islands.